Homicide 1904, the case of Timothy Lynch, who murdered Robert Marriner at the Winchester Workhouse. Timothy Lynch was convicted of the murder of Robert Marriner, 84, and sentenced to death but reprieved. He beat him to death with a shoe during a quarrel at Winchester Workhouse on the 14th of December 1903. Timothy Lynch was a blind man, and he, along with Robert Marriner, were both inmates in the infirm ward at Winchester Workhouse. It was noted that all the other inmates were also very old men. It was said that it was clear that Robert Marriner was an aggravating old man, and that he would frequently annoy Timothy Lynch by leaving the door of the ward open, which was right next to Timothy Lynch's bed. However, it was also noted that Timothy Lynch himself was also irritable, and that other inmates seemed to have stood in fear of him. Timothy Lynch had gone out on the 14th of December 1903 and come back at about 4:30 p.m. quite sober, but smelling of beer. It was said that it was not clear how the quarrel between them started, but it was thought that Timothy Lynch had initially collided with Robert Marriner's chair, which irritated him, and so he struck Robert Marriner and knocked him off the chair onto the floor, doing no great harm. They then had tea, after which Robert Marriner carried the remains of the bread out of the room and left the door open, which enraged Timothy Lynch, who got hold of him and hit him on the jaw. Robert Marriner then got back into his bed at the other end of the room. However, after an interval of about 5 minutes, Timothy Lynch shouted, "I've not done with you yet. I'm coming for you again. I'm turning it over in my mind whether to fist you or boot you. I have come to the conclusion that I will not soil my hands with such a dirty cur as you are, and I'm going to boot you." Timothy Lynch then went up the ward with his boots in his hands and struck Robert Marriner several severe blows with them on the head. When Timothy Lynch's father, who was also an inmate in the ward, shouted for him to come away, Timothy Lynch said, "If you don't shut up, I will serve you worse." Timothy Lynch then beat Robert Marriner some more with the boots and came away with the remark, "Let that be a lesson to him." The workhouse porter was then called, and he found Robert Marriner sitting on his bed unconscious. He died the following morning from a fractured skull. His post-mortem showed that the parietal bone of his skull had been fractured, and that the pressure on his brain had caused his death. When Timothy Lynch was asked by the master of the workhouse what he had been doing to Robert Marriner, he replied, "I gave him one under the jaw, the dirty old beast. I've had enough to put up with him for the last 2 years." It was noted that the following morning Timothy Lynch asked how Robert Marriner was and said that he felt sorry for the poor old man. It was also noted that there was nothing to show unambiguously that Timothy Lynch had meant to kill Robert Marriner, but it was said that it was clear that he had attacked him with much deliberation. It was further noted that if Robert Marriner had been a younger man, that it was unlikely that the blows would have caused him a fatal injury. At his trial, Timothy Lynch was found guilty of murder on the 2nd of February 1904, but recommended to mercy on account of his blindness and because of the provocation that he had received. Timothy Lynch was later released from HMP Parkhurst on the 5th of June 1914, having served just over 10 years.